Hello and welcome to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. Today's episode is Science Should Figure Shit Out. Yeah, what good is science if it doesn't help us live better lives? That's the question I'll be asking today. So I've got my Pete's coffee. It is a cafe Americano with a little bit of room for cream and honey because we all need a little bit of sugar with our caffeine. Okay, so get that beverage ready, the adult beverage of your choice. It is a little after 1 o'clock on the West Coast, which means pretty much anywhere in the continental United States, you should not be having alcohol. But if you do, if you choose to violate that social expectation, we won't hold it against you because we're not judgy on this channel. Okay, here we go. That simultaneous sip. So wonderful, so delicious. So I'm going to be talking about stuff today, which is both controversial and should be non-controversial. So you may know that your host here is a bit of a controversial fellow, somebody who has been banned by the nation of Australia, who has had his books removed from Amazon during the Trump administration, and whom the Biden administration pressured Amazon to downlist 2 of his books. So you may think, wow, you're kind of a bad guy. But I'm not. I'm just a guy who's trying to figure shit out. And I'm thinking that science should be doing the same thing. Because if science isn't helping us figure shit out, then what the hell is it doing? So, science should help us figure things out. What is it that I've been trying to figure out, which has gotten me in so much trouble? I've gotten in trouble because I'm trying to figure out autism, which, if you know anything about it, you know that 30 to 40 years ago, the numbers for autism were 1 in 10,000. Before 1945, I believe, no cases of autism had actually been observed. Yes, that's right. Before Leo Kanner did his monograph from Johns Hopkins University, identifying the first 11 individuals with autism, it was pretty much unknown on planet Earth. MSMF8UU, I'm doing great today. Glad to have you in the house. Okay, so I've been trying to figure out this simple problem. Why has autism gone from 1 in 10,000, perhaps 30 or 40 years ago? Some of you may be old enough to remember the movie Rain Man with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman. And that, I believe, was in the early 90s. It introduced people to autism, most of which the public had never heard of. Fast forward to today's numbers, estimated to be 1 in 30. So that means that pretty much every single classroom in America has somebody suffering with some type of autism. Now, why do I care so much about the autism issue? Because I have a kid with autism. My daughter, Jacqueline, who is 28 years old, has pretty severe autism. She does not speak, but she communicates by use of a letterboard, and she has a great deal of difficulty controlling not only her mouth, but her body, which explains why, even though being of normal intelligence, she is still in diapers. This is something that's not good for her and not good for me and my wife. So you'll forgive me if I am interested in my daughter becoming healthy enough so that she lives on her own. Do we believe that her autism is linked to a vaccination? Yes, we do, because we saw our son go mute for 12 days after his 18-month series of vaccinations. And it was only because of early dietary intervention we recovered him. And now, at the age of 26, he is a fully functional, employed human being looking forward to getting married. So this is a very important issue to me, which is why I look towards science to give me some answers. Yes, I can say vaccines harmed my daughter, but what I don't know is how to help her, how to fix the damage, because I believe as long as there is life, there is hope. And so, as my daughter is alive and pretty healthy, all things considered, I am interested in what science can help me to do, because with her uh, uh, spelling program, she demonstrates herself to be of high intelligence. So she's got a brain in there. She's got a personality. She's actually pretty funny. She likes to write poems with her facilitated communication. It's just that her brain ain't connected to her body. So I look to science to help me answer these questions. So, with that being said, I've got kind of a science themed episode today. One of my favorite sources to get science from is a website called Science Daily. And as I've been interested in health for a long time, I just thought I would go over a number of stories which touch on things which I think have the potential to help human beings. The first story from Science Daily: supercharged natural killer cells could be a powerful new cancer weapon. So, in my books with Dr. Judy Mikovits, looking into the question of chronic fatigue syndrome and autism, one of the observations that she made is that in chronic fatigue syndrome, and she believes in autism, that the natural killer cells of the body are affected. So, when I ran across this article about natural killer cells being manipulated to go after cancer, it really caught my attention. Now, because I'm accused of being anti-science, that's why I like to read directly from the source, which, did I mention, is Science Daily. So this is from recent articles. Cell therapies that harness the immune system have transformed treatment for some cancers of the blood and lymphatic system. Solid tumors, however, have remained much more difficult to treat because they are harder for immune cells to enter and can release signals that weaken nearby immune defenses. Researchers at Stanford Medicine and collaborating institutions have now developed a strategy aimed at overcoming those obstacles. Their approach transforms natural killer cells, a type of immune cell known for rapidly attacking abnormal cells, into a specialized tissue resident form that can move into solid tumors and destroy cancer cells. Quote, "We show that these resident natural killer cells infiltrate into the solid tumors much better than conventional natural killer cells. It was very reproducible, very striking, and very clear," said John Sunwoo, MD, the Edward C. and Amy H. Sewall Professor in the School of Medicine and senior author of the study, published last month in Science Translational Medicine. So what does that mean? It means that you have natural killer cells which are responsible for going after cancer and viruses. So by making some modifications, they have supercharged these natural killer cells so that they'll go after hard to beat cancers. That is an example of science making our lives better. Now, Dr. Mikovits had talked about natural killer cells being really important. So we know how important they are in cancer and viral infections, hint, hint, COVID. And then there was this article from Science Daily. People who live past 110 have an unusual abundance of killer immune cells, the natural killer cells. So here's from the article, because did I mention that I love science? Levels of specialized immune cells called CD4 cytotoxic T lymphocytes, CD4. These cells have previously been shown to kill tumor cells in certain cancers. During illness, they can also reproduce rapidly through a process called clonal expansion, helping the immune system respond to infection. New research published August 19th in the Cell Press journal Cell Reports suggests that the same type of immune activity may be associated in healthy aging in people who lived beyond 110. Quote, immune aging is not simply a process of decline, says first author Kosuke Hashimoto, an associate professor at the University of Osaka in Japan. The selective expansion of certain T cells suggests that even in extreme old age, the immune system may continue to adapt to age-related challenges. So in other words, killer T cells will not just go after cancer, but they may be important in how long you live. So, since we all want to live forever, maybe we should be demanding increased research dollars going into killer T cells. The next article from Science Daily, because I'm fascinated by the brain, is depression may shut down the brain's ability to make new neurons. So if you have depression, or people who do suffer from depression, such as my father did. My father was very clear about the fact that he considered himself something of a depressive individual. And when he and I would talk about it, he always said, I think there's just something different with my brain, because he was aware of the fact that he really didn't have that much to be depressed about, but he was depressed. And as he and I would talk about our various ways of seeing the world, it kind of became clear to me that whatever was affecting my father was radically different than what affects me, because I do not seem to have a depressive state of mind. If anything, I seem to have an optimistic state of mind. And this is not something I've attributed to me just being an awesome person, but in my discussions with many people, it just seems to me that I was fortunate in my brain chemistry. And so I thought this was really interesting, because it's always struck me that the value of science should be in explaining things. And once they explain things, they figure out how to fix them. So here's some science research about depression. The findings provide the first evidence that neurogenesis, the process of producing new neurons, stalls in the brains of adults with major depressive disorders. Researchers also identified molecular programs involved in controlling this process, offering potential clues for developing new treatments. Historically, depression was thought to be a disease of neurotransmitter deficiency, especially serotonin. But we now think that depression stems from multiple issues that affect our neurons' ability to adapt to stress and changing environments, says Maura DuPont, professor of psychiatry, who led the research. Without the ability to create new neurons, people with depression may not have the resilience to effectively adapt to the environment. And one of the things that was really interesting about this research is that they found out that those who had depression also had difficulty forming new memories. So it suggests that what's happening in depression is that the mind is basically being overwhelmed by what's going on. It's not able to adapt. So, for those suffering from depression, it's a very serious condition. We need science to guide us to answers. And that research seems quite promising. We should figure out what we need to do to enable people to grow new neurons. It should help not only with depression, but with memory. Okay, as we continue working on the brain, lots of people are worried about Alzheimer's. And so there's this article from Science Daily. A major Alzheimer's risk gene may shrink brain cells years before symptoms. So, for those of you who are familiar with Alzheimer's, it's basically a problem usually associated with aging, but it is happening in younger and younger people. Strangely, like the autism numbers are increasing. So, we want to know why. It's not just enough to observe it, but science should be able to intervene and make things better for people. So, from this article, in a study using mouse models published in Nature Aging, the researchers found that ApoE4 increases production of a protein called NEL2. Higher NEL2 levels cause neurons to become smaller and unusually active. Mice with the greatest brain hyperactivity when they were young later developed the most severe memory problems. So, if you have memory problems, maybe you've got this overactive NEL2 protein. Quote, to the best of our knowledge, this is the first study that has directly examined what ApoE4 does to the function of neurons at different ages, says Misha Zilberter, PhD, principal staff research scientist at Gladstone and a senior author of the study. We found fundamental changes in brain circuits occurring in young mice that still had normal learning and memory, and importantly, that those changes predicted the development of cognitive deficits at older ages. Again, what should science be good at doing? Science should be good at identifying, predicting, and then intervening so that things cannot go wrong. Okay, the last article from Science Daily. Common medication may change your gut for years. Whenever I see something about the gut, I'm really interested because one of the problems that autism patients have is affected gut problems. So they're often not digesting things well. In the case of my daughter, her stools are often loose, even though we do many things. So the gut health of autistic kids is a serious problem. And the question is, what may have caused that? One of the things that my daughter did have very early on was frequent ear infections, which were treated with antibiotics. I have to admit that early antibiotic use may be associated with autism because that's been the experience of many parents and also with vaccines. So the question is, what might antibiotics and vaccines have done to the gut microbiome? So here's this really interesting research, which raises the question of whether we really understand what we've been doing with children, not just with vaccines, but with early antibiotic administration, specifically when they might have an ear infection. So listen to this from the research. Researchers analyzed stool samples and prescription records from more than 2,500 participants in the Estonian Biobank, who were part of the Estonian microbiome cohort. You probably didn't even know that existed. They found that most of the medications examined were associated with differences in the gut microbiome. For a substantial number of drugs, those differences could still be detected years after people had stopped taking the medication. The lasting effects were not limited to antibiotics, which are already well known for their ability to disrupt populations of gut bacteria. Antidepressants, beta blockers, proton pump inhibitors, and benzodiazepines, which my daughter has also been on for her seizures, were also associated with distinctive microbial fingerprints. Beta blockers are commonly used to treat conditions such as high blood pressure and certain heart problems. Proton pump inhibitors reduce stomach acid and are often prescribed for acid reflux and related conditions. Benzodiazepines are medications commonly used for anxiety and other disorders like seizures. Kind of interesting, right? That a benzodiazepine that's used for seizures would also be used for anxiety, and one would assume depression. What common things do these all share? Some sort of brain dysfunction that we're trying to address with medication, which may be caused by something else. Science should tell us what that something else is. So these are 5 science articles which look at serious problems. Cancer, what's going on? You don't have good killer T cell function. Living a long time, you might want to make sure your killer immune cells, your natural killer T cells are strong. If your natural killer T cells are strong, maybe you're going to live past 110 years old. If you've got depression, maybe your brain has stopped working and isn't creating the neurons necessary for you, not just to make new memories, but for you to not be overwhelmed by the world. What about Alzheimer's? Maybe Alzheimer's is really the result of an overactive protein. If you can dial down the activity of that protein, then maybe you'll never get Alzheimer's. And what about taking prescription medications? Might that affect your gut microbiome? Might that affect so many things? We are living in a world of such uncertainty where science has taken what I believe in many instances have been unjustifiable risks, not understanding what they may be doing. But as science can also do many negative things, it can also do positive things. But science needs to make sure that it has courage, that these areas of research that I have talked about are pursued with all possible diligence. Because I believe that as long as there is life, even if people are desperately ill, the body wants to heal itself. It is waiting to be healed. It is waiting for science to weigh in on those interventions which can return people to health and make us a much healthier citizenry. Well, that's all I have for you today. Hopefully, this has not been the best part of your day. Hopefully, the best part of your day is talking to the real people in your life and not some good looking, brilliant guy on the internet. Thanks and have a great day.